section we are going to learn about the early clinical exposure. Now, under the heading of early clinical exposure, we are going to give you a brief idea of particular disease and signs, symptoms, investigations, and the treatment aspect of that particular disease. And the disease in focus in our today's early clinical exposure is the diabetes mellitus. So let's learn in detail. So what is diabetes? So diabetes is the one type of disease. Now what happens in disease? There is certain pathophysiological changes that occur in our body that ultimately gives us a sign and symptoms. So in simple terminology, disease is what is disease? It is a something is not right in the body. Now whenever there is something is not right in the body, it is known as pathology. By definition, pathology is nothing but an altered physiology. So in order to understand the disease diabetes, we have to understand the physiology behind the diabetes mellitus. Now the physiology of the diabetes mellitus, or what are the changes that are taking place in the physiology that will lead to the pathology of the disease. In order to understand that, we have to learn in detail about the insulin, the endocrinal secretion of the pancreas, that we are going to learn in detail in our regular lectures. Now, what happens in diabetic mellitus? See, one out of two things happens with the insulin. One is either insulin is absent or insulin is present but not able to act. Now, this both the condition will define the two different type of the diabetes. If the insulin is absent, it is known as a type 1 diabetes mellitus, and if insulin is present but not able to act, there is a problem with the action of the insulin, it is known as type 2 diabetes mellitus. Right now, in diabetes mellitus, the changes will take place in the metabolic level. So you need to understand about the changes that is present taking place in the carbohydrate metabolism, fat metabolism, and important one is not the protein, but we in our discussion is the potassium. In order to understand the physiological aspect of the diabetes, let's understand about the pancreas. See, as far as the anatomical location of the pancreas is concerned, it is basically the retroperitoneal organ. It is situated in the posterior aspect of the abdomen. Now, if you magnify the pancreas, it will be look like this. So portion, this portion is the pancreas. Now, in pancreas, there are two types of the cell are present. One particular type of the cell are designed to secrete the exocrine juice or the pancreatic juice, and the other type is this violet color cluster that is present in scattered form in the pancreas. It is known as the islets of the Langerhans. They are basically the endocrinal portion of the pancreas. So pancreas has a two portion. One is the acini. This greenish portion is the acini. This one is the acini. It secretes the digestive juice. Another portion is the islets of the Langerhans, the violet color cluster of the cell. It is the islets of the Langerhans. They are ultimately going to secrete the hormones. Now let's understand the islets of the Langerhans in detail. It is basically 1 or 2 million in number. If we magnify this one islet, it will be look like this one, and it has a particular cells present in it. The beta cell that is present, it's going to secrete the insulin and the amylin. Alpha cell on the other hand will secrete the glucagon. Delta cell is going to secrete the somatostatin. F cell is going to secrete the pancreatic polypeptide, and the epsilon cell, it is not shown in the diagram, is going to secrete the ghrelin. So there are the list of the hormones that is secreted by the islets of the Langerhans or the endocrinal portion of the pancreas. The hormone in our focus is the insulin. The history of the insulin. In the history of the insulin, Nobel Prize was given to two scientists named Banting and MacLeod. Now the discovery of the insulin is done by this Banting with the help of his students Charles Babbage. Both these scientists will remove a pancreas from a dog, then they see that the dog will show the symptoms of the diabetes mellitus. Now, after some time, both the scientists will grind the pancreas and give juice to that particular dog, as they see that the dog will recover from the symptoms of the diabetes. Now, what is the role of the macleod in colic in this? The macleod will provide the laboratory and help the Banting in order to discover the insulin. And this colic guy, this colic, it purify the insulin. So after some time, they first give the purified insulin to this boy known as the Thompson. It is suffer from the type 1 diabetes mellitus, and after injecting the purified form of the insulin, it will live next 13 years. Now, before discovery of the insulin, if any child or if any person will discover the type 1 diabetes, his life expectancy will be the 1 year. Now, by giving the insulin dose, this child will further survive for 13 years, and after 13 years, this person will die due to the pneumonia. So, the Nobel Prize was given to Banting and MacLeod, but after achieving the Nobel Prize, this Banting will share half of his Nobel Prize with the best, and this MacLeod share his half to this Colic. Now the structure of the insulin. As far as the structure of the insulin is concerned, it is a protein hormone or the polypeptide hormone having 51 amino acid sequence, and it's arranged in the two row. See over here, the red color one and these two red colored row of insulin. So one are known as the A chain, another one is known as the B chain. Both these chain are joined by the disulfide bond. The A chain is made up of 21 set of the amino acid, and remaining B chain will made up of 30 amino acid sequence. Then the effect of the insulin. What is the effect of insulin over the carbohydrate metabolism, fat metabolism, protein metabolism, and what its effect on the electrolyte? So in order to remember it very simply, you have to remember that insulin will cut the carbohydrate. By meaning of cut the carbohydrate is that insulin is going to decrease the blood glucose level. It favors fat. Now favors fat means that it promotes the synthesis of the fat. It promotes the lipogenesis and prevent the lipolysis. Now, as far as the protein metabolism is concerned, insulin is the anabolic effect. It promotes the protein synthesis, EP. And under the heading of electrolyte, you need to remember only one electrolyte, that is the potassium. Now, what insulin do? Insulin keep the potassium in cell. So, what happens if you give the insulin? Whatever the potassium that is present extracellularly will enter inside the cell. So there is an influx of potassium inside the cell. It is the effect of the insulin. Effect of insulin over the carbohydrate metabolism. In previous slide, I told you that insulin will cut the carbohydrate. By meaning of cut the carbohydrate is insulin decrease the blood glucose level. Now here the question arises, how insulin will decrease the blood glucose level? So answer is that insulin increase the uptake of the glucose inside the cell. It increase the uptake of the glucose inside the cell. Second thing it will do, it increase the use of the use of the glucose by that particular cell, and if there is excess amount of the carbohydrate is there, then it increase the storage of the glucose. Now, there are particular organ in which the insulin will do its effect over the carbohydrate metabolism. So the insulin is especially act on, first is the heart, second organ is the muscle, skeletal muscle, and the third one is the adipose tissue. Now, these three organs are specifically designed to a receptor of the insulin, and the effect of insulin is more pronounced in these three organs, so it is asked frequently in the MCQs. So to remember it easily, you have to remember this actress HEMA. HE stands for heart, M stands for muscle, A stands for adipose tissue. Now, effect of insulin on the fat metabolism. As I told you in our previous slide, insulin favors fat. By meaning of that, insulin will increase the fat synthesis, promote the fat synthesis, and increase its storage. So, what insulin basically do? Insulin increase the utilization of the glucose, while on the other hand, it decreases the utilization of the fat. So, by decreased utilization of the fat, insulin acts as a fat sparer. Now, if carbohydrate are ingested more than it can be used, then this excess amount of the carbohydrate again will converted into the fatty acid and it increases the synthesis of the fat by lipogenesis. How insulin increases the fatty acid synthesis? First thing the insulin do, it is increase the transport of the glucose into the liver. Now, once the liver had enough glucose, that glucose is ultimately converted or split into the pyruvate. Now, this pyruvate is going to convert into the acetyl CoA. The acetyl CoA is the substrate from which the fatty acid is synthesized. So, what insulin do? Insulin activate the acetyl CoA carboxylase. Now, by activating acetyl CoA carboxylase, insulin will convert the acetyl CoA into the malonyl CoA. Now, this step is the first step of the fatty acid synthesis. Now, once the enough amount of fatty acid is synthesized in the liver, it converted the fatty acid into the triglyceride. Now, in order to make a triglyceride, there are three fatty acids. The three fatty acid is bind with the glycerol. It make a triglyceride. So, after that, it transported this triglyceride to the adipose tissue. Now, this triglyceride is just to transport the fatty acid into to the adipose tissue. Once it reaches to the adipose tissue, insulin activate the enzyme known as lipoprotein lipase. Now, what this lipoprotein lipase will do, this lipoprotein lipase will split this triglyceride. It split the triglyceride, and once it converted into the fatty acid and glycerol. Now, this after that splitting of the triglyceride into the fatty acid, this fatty acid is going to absorb into the adipose cell. Now, inside the adipose cell, this fatty acid will ultimately bind with the glycerol that is made inside this adipose cell and converted into the triglyceride again. And fatty acid will be stored in the form of triglyceride into the adipose cell. So, let me tell you one more time. Once the fatty acid is synthesized, it binds with glycerol to make a triglyceride, and this triglyceride is just to transport it to the adipose tissue. Once this triglyceride reaches to the adipose tissue, insulin again activate this enzyme lipoprotein lipase. This lipoprotein lipase will ultimately again split this triglyceride into the fatty acid and glycerol. Now, glycerol are not able to cross the adipose cell membrane, but this fatty acid on the other hand will cross the cell membrane, enter inside the adipose tissue, and inside this adipose tissue, this adipose cell, it make its own glycerol, and whatever the fatty acid that is absorbed inside the adipose cell or transported inside the adipose cell bind with the glycerol and make a triglyceride. Now, this is all about the effect of insulin over the fat. Now, what happens if there is a deficiency of the insulin? Now, insulin is going to activate the lipoprotein lipase enzyme. That lipoprotein lipase enzyme will ultimately responsible for transport of the fatty acid inside the adipose cell by splitting the triglyceride. Now, whenever there is a deficiency of the insulin occur, in the deficiency state, one more enzyme will be activated. The name of the enzyme is hormone sensitive lipase. Now, what is the function of the hormone sensitive lipase? The function of hormone sensitive lipase is same as lipoprotein lipase. It does split the triglyceride into fatty acid and glycerol. But this hormone sensitive lipase will causes hydrolysis of stored triglyceride that is present inside the adipose cell. So the difference between hormone sensitive lipase and lipoprotein lipase is that lipoprotein lipase will split the triglyceride outside the adipose cell, and hormone sensitive lipase will split the triglyceride inside the adipose cell. So by causing hydrolysis of the stored triglyceride, large quantity of the free fatty acid and glycerol is ultimately released into the circulation from the adipose cell, and increase free fatty acid inside the circulation, and this free fatty acid that is present in higher amount become the main energy substrate. This thing happens in the deficiency of the insulin. Once the free fatty acid is excess in the plasma, this excess amount of free fatty acid will ultimately go to the liver. Inside the liver, this free fatty acid is converted into the two substrates. One is the phospholipid, another one is the cholesterol. So ultimately, these two substances are going to release into the blood, and once the cholesterol release into the blood, there is increased amount of cholesterol inside the circulation will promote the development of the atherosclerosis. Now you know the term atherosclerosis means. It means there is a formation of the plaque over the blood vessel, and by making this plaque, this atherosclerotic plaque will narrow the blood vessel lumen, and ultimately it blocks these vessels. How ketone bodies are formed in the insulin deficiency. See, in the previous slide I told you that whenever there is an insulin deficiency, there are more amount of fatty acid will be released from the adipose cell, and once there are more amount of fatty acid inside the circulation, it entered inside the liver. So excess free fatty acid in the liver ultimately it increase the utilization of this fatty acid by beta oxidation. Now once the beta oxidation of the free fatty acid will occur, it will increase the formation of acetyl CoA. Now, if there are too much fatty acid in beta oxidation occur, then this too much formation of the acetyl CoA will occur, and excess acetyl CoA is then condensed to make a substance known as acetoacetic acid. Now, some of the acetyl CoA is converted into the beta hydroxybutyric acid and acetone. Now, up to this, you know the excess free fatty acid will be used as an energy source. In order to use it as an energy source, this free fatty acid will be converted into the acetyl CoA. Now once this more amount of fatty acid will converted into acetyl CoA, this acetyl CoA will be condensed and make a substance known as acetoacetic acid. Some of the acetyl CoA is converted into the beta hydroxybutyric acid and acetone. Now these three substances, acetoacetic acid, beta hydroxybutyric acid and acetone, will ultimately make the known as the ketone bodies. These three substances are known as the ketone bodies, and these ketone bodies are being acid. They decrease the blood pH level, and the condition in which this acidosis will occur in the presence of the ketone bodies is known as a ketoacidosis. How the insulin is secreted? Insulin is basically secreted by beta cell of the endocrine pancreas. So let's see how the secretion will take place. This is the beta cell of the pancreas. So first action will be take place is the entry of the glucose inside the beta cell via GLUT2. This GLUT2 is glucose transporter type 2. Now once the glucose is inside the beta cell, it will converted into the glucose 6-phosphate. Now this conversion of glucose into glucose 6-phosphate will be done by an enzyme known as glucokinase. Right? So till now glucose will be transported inside the beta cell. It uses the GLUT2 transport. Now if there is a deficiency of this GLUT2 transporter protein, it will lead to a disease known as Fanconi-Bickel syndrome. So what actually happens in Fanconi-Bickel syndrome? There is a mutation of this GLUT2 transporter. And if there is a deficiency of this glucokinase enzyme, so there is no more conversion of the glucose into the glucose 6 phosphate. That condition is known as MODY2. This MODY stands for maturity onset diabetes of young type 2. Now in both these conditions, insulin is not secreted by beta cell and the diabetes will occur. Now the next step in our discussion is glucose 6 phosphate will be oxidized to make a ATP. Once inside this beta cell there is enough amount of ATP will be there, this ATP will close this ATP sensitive potassium channel. Now this ATP sensitive potassium channel normally it remains open and it leads to the potassium efflux. Now once the glucose enter inside the beta cell, this glucose will be utilized and make enough amount of the ATP. This ATP will close this potassium channel. So there is no more potassium efflux will take place. So potassium will be accumulated inside the beta cell. It causes this beta cell to depolarize. Once the depolarization voltage will be reached to a certain level, it causes the opening of voltage gated calcium channel. And once this voltage gated calcium channel is open, it will lead to entry of the calcium inside this beta cell. Now once the enough amount of calcium is there in the cytoplasm of the beta cell, it causes the release of the insulin granules and the insulin will be released in the blood. So this is how the insulin is secreted by beta cell. Let's learn the clinical importance of this channel, the potassium channel. Now this potassium channel has a receptor over it. It is known as SUR1. Now the meaning of SUR1 is that it is sulfonyl urease receptor. So this potassium channel has a receptor known as sulfonyl urease receptor. I told you in detail about the function of this channel. This channel is actually open normally. Once this channel will open, it causes the potassium efflux, and once the potassium efflux will occur, the cell become repolarized, and insulin secretion will be stopped. So there are certain drugs that use this potassium channel as a receptor and close this channel. So that drugs will ultimately increase the potassium inside the cell, and via all these three steps, it will increase the insulin release. So the name of the drug that is going to use this SUR1 is the sulfonyl urease. Now the sulfonyl urea group of the drug will close this potassium channel, and by closing this potassium channel it ultimately increase the insulin secretion. Now these sulfonyl urease drug are used in diabetes mellitus in order to increase the insulin release. Now one more drug is utilize this receptor, but instead of closing this channel it causes opening of this channel, so it will decrease the insulin release. Now in which condition we want decrease insulin secretion? It is the tumor known as insulinoma. Now in the tumor insulinoma we need less amount of the insulin release, so the drug that is open this channel it is known as diazoxide. Now this diazoxide, by opening this potassium channel, it causes decreased insulin secretion. So this is the importance of the potassium channel. This potassium channel is utilized by two set of the drug. One set of the drug is increase the insulin secretion. Another set of the drug will decrease the insulin secretion. Now the effect of GI hormone in insulin secretion. The GI hormone, the gastrointestinal hormone, will ultimately increase the insulin secretion. So which hormones are going to increase the insulin secretion? First write it down. First one is the gastrin, then the secretin. Third one is the CCK, that is cholecystokinin. Fourth one is the GLP-1, that is glucagon like peptide. GLP stands for glucagon like peptide 1, and the last one is GIP1. Now the meaning of GIP is the gastric inhibitory peptide, or you can say glucose dependent insulinotropic peptide. All these four hormones, once is released, it will increase the insulin secretion. Now, out of these four, these two, GLP-1 and GIP, are the most potent. These last two are the most important one. Both these hormone will ultimately increase the insulin secretion by beta cell. So, by increasing insulin secretion, both these hormones are known as insulinotropic or incretins. So the GLP-1 and GIP are known as the incretins. The incretins are the set of the hormones that ultimately increase the insulin secretion. Based on our previous discussion, the answer of this question, why oral glucose release greater amount of the insulin than intravenous injection. So once you give the glucose orally, it will increase the release of the gastrointestinal hormone. Which hormone that I mentioned in our previous slide? Gastrin, secretin, CCK, GLP-1 and GIP. All these hormones will ultimately potentiate the insulin release, and IV glucose, once we give the insulin by intravenously, that intravenous administration of the glucose will not going to release this gastrointestinal hormones. So this incretin effect will be not seen if we give the glucose IV. So that's why oral glucose release greater amount of the insulin than the intravenous glucose. How diabetes mellitus is defined. Now, up to this level, we learn about the physiological aspect of the insulin, how the action of the insulin will take place, what is the role of the insulin in our metabolism. Now, let's discuss our actual topic, that is diabetes mellitus, how diabetes mellitus is defined. Now, as far as the definition is concerned, diabetes mellitus is a syndrome that is due to impairment of carbohydrate, fat, and protein metabolism. Now, what is the syndrome? Syndrome is a collection of signs and symptoms related to the pathophysiology. Now, what happens in diabetes mellitus? There is impairment in the carbohydrate and fat and protein metabolism, but the main focus is about carbohydrate and fat metabolism. Now, this impairment of the metabolism is caused by two things. One, either lack of the insulin secretion, insulin is not secreted regularly. The second one is the insulin is there but not able to act, that is decreased sensitivity of the tissue to the insulin, that is insulin resistance. So this is how you can define the diabetes mellitus. It is a syndrome of impaired carbohydrate, fat and protein metabolism. It is caused by lack of the insulin or decreased sensitivity of the tissue to the insulin. Is broadly divided into the two types, type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is known as IDDM, insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, and type 2 diabetes is known as the non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus. Now, as far as the type 1 diabetes is concerned, is basically due to lack of the insulin secretion. Now, this lack of the insulin secretion is due to the destruction of the beta cell of the pancreas. Now, this destruction of the pancreatic islet will occur due to viral infection or due to the autoimmunity. When the insulin secretion is very low or even absent, and the patients suffer are lean. And from all the cases, 10 to 20% of the cases are of the type 1 diabetes, and it is known as the juvenile onset diabetes because it is present in young age. Now, as far as the type 2 diabetes is concerned, it's due to the decreased sensitivity of the insulin, and it's called insulin resistance. And the insulin level is either normal or elevated, and the patients are obese. And the remaining percentage of the diabetic case are due to the type 2 diabetes, that is 80% of the case. And type 1 diabetes, as it is present in the younger individual, type 2 diabetes will be seen in the older individual. It is known as adult onset diabetes mellitus. Now let's discuss what actually happens in the diabetes mellitus, the consequences of the diabetes mellitus. So first thing first, the effect of the insulin. What insulin actually do? Insulin causes use of the glucose. It utilizes the glucose and fat sparer. It stores the fat. So in diabetes mellitus, there is a deficiency of the insulin. So the action of the insulin will not take place. So instead of using the glucose, there is a increase glucose can be used. There is increased amount of glucose in the circulation. The condition is known as hyperglycemia. Now store glucose. Another effect of the insulin is store glucose. Now in diabetes mellitus there is a defect of the insulin action, so it causes lipid can't be stored. So the condition is known as hyperlipidemia, increased amount of the lipid inside the circulation. So there are two consequences will occur in the diabetes mellitus. One is the hyperglycemia and its consequences. Another one is the hyperlipidemia and its consequences. Let's learn in detail. What happens due to the hyperglycemia? What are the hyperglycemic consequences? The first thing is there are more amount of glucose inside the circulation that ultimately leads to the glycosuria. Now what is the glycosuria? Glycosuria means loss of glucose in the urine. Second thing, it causes the polyuria. Now what is the polyuria? Polyuria means increased urine output more than 4 liter urine output. So more than 2 to 4 liter if you become more precise. Third one is the cellular dehydration and polydipsia. Polydipsia means increased drinking, means excessive drinking of the water. And the last one is polyphagia. Now what is the meaning of polyphagia? That is excessive eating. So these are the list of the consequences that occur in the hyperglycemia. Now let's learn how these consequences will take place. Means how the hyperglycemia will lead to the glycosuria, polyuria, cellular dehydration, polydipsia and polyphagia. Now let's understand how glycosuria and polyuria occur. So first thing is in diabetes mellitus there is a deficiency of the insulin. Now again one more time, what is the function of insulin as far as the carbohydrate metabolism is concerned? It decreases the blood glucose level. Now in insulin deficiency there is increased blood glucose level. Now how in insulin deficiency there is a increased blood glucose level will occur. So first action of the insulin is that it increase the uptake of the glucose inside the cell. So in deficiency of the insulin, it causes decrease of glucose uptake inside the cell. So no more glucose will enter inside the cell from the circulation. Second thing that is happens in the insulin deficiency is that there is an increased glycogenolysis. Whatever the glycogen is stored is going to lyse in insulin deficiency. So once the glycogen is lysed, it causes more amount of the glucose released inside the circulation. Third thing that is happens in the insulin deficiency is that it increases gluconeogenesis. Now what is the gluconeogenesis? Generation of the new glucose from non-carbohydrate source. So in insulin deficiency, there is hyperglycemia will occur due to these three effects. One is decreased uptake by cell of the glucose. Second one is increased glycogenolysis. So more amount of the glucose will release from the glycogen. Third one is increased gluconeogenesis, means synthesis of the glucose from the non-carbohydrate source like amino acid. So basically increased blood glucose level will occur. Now it sometimes reach to 300 to 1200 milligram per deciliter in the insulin deficiency. Now more glucose will be present inside the circulation, so more amount of the glucose is going to filter in the renal tubules, then it can be reabsorbed. Let me repeat one more time. As the blood glucose level increases, there are more amount of the glucose is present inside the circulation. the more amount of the glucose is going to filter in the renal tubules in the renal glomeruli, then it can be reabsorbed. There is a threshold of a kidney that once this threshold is reached, no more glucose reabsorption will take place. So once the renal threshold is reached, once the capacity of the transporter that is present in the renal tubules will reach more than that plasma concentration, all the glucose will ultimately enter in the urine. So what is the renal threshold? So kidney has a capacity to reabsorb all the glucose that is filtered till the plasma glucose level is 180 milligram per deciliter. So in other words, in our blood, if the glucose concentration is up to 180 milligram per deciliter, all the glucose that is filtered in the renal tubule are ultimately reabsorbed. Now once this renal threshold is reached, when the plasma glucose is more than 180 milligram per deciliter, it appears in the urine. And once the glucose will appear in the urine, that condition is known as glycosuria. So what happens once the glucose level will cross to this point 180 milligram per deciliter, glucose will ultimately appear in the urine. And as we know that glucose is osmotically active particle, so lots of the glucose in the urine will drag water along with it. So once the water also increase inside the urine, it is known as a osmotic diuresis. So what is osmotic diuresis? Glucose that is present in the urine will osmotically drag water along with it, so it causes the diuresis. The diuresis is known as osmotic diuresis. So the volume of the water is also increased, it will lead to the polyuria. That's how insulin deficiency will ultimately lead to glycosuria and polyuria. How cellular dehydration will occur? How insulin deficiency will lead to cellular dehydration? So first thing we know that insulin deficiency will lead to the glycosuria. So what happens in the glycosuria? In glycosuria, there is lots of glucose in the urine that drag the water along with it. So there are lots of glucose and lots of water. So it will rise osmotic diuresis and polyuria. There is nothing but our previous slide. So what happens in insulin deficiency? Insulin deficiency will lead to loss of glucose along with loss of water. That is glycosuria and polyuria. So increased fluid loss leads to hypertonic plasma. So the tonicity of the plasma will increase and it leads to the hypertonic plasma because of the loss of the water. So it will lead to increased osmotic pressure of the extracellular fluid in comparison with the intracellular fluid, and ultimately osmotic transport of water will occur from cell to extracellular fluid. As the water moves from cell to extracellular fluid, it causes cellular dehydration. This is how insulin deficiency will ultimately lead to the cellular dehydration. Now, how insulin deficiency will lead to the polydipsia, or how polydipsia will occur in the diabetic mellitus. So first thing is that in diabetes there is increased plasma glucose level. So whenever there is increased plasma glucose level, it causes hyperosmolar plasma, and this hyperosmolar plasma will lead to the cellular dehydration. Once this cellular dehydration will occur, it causes activation of the third center. Since the third center is also a one type of osmoreceptor, it will detect the osmolarity of the plasma, and this activation of the third center. Now where this third center is situated? This third center is situated in the hypothalamus, in the lateral nuclei. So once there is a cellular dehydration, that cellular dehydration will ultimately activate the third center that is present in the lateral hypothalamus, and excessive drinking of the water will take place. Person will drink large amount of the water, and it is known as polydipsia. This is how the polydipsia will occur. How polyphagia will occur? So insulin deficiency will lead to decreased glucose entry into the cell. See, one of the functions of the insulin is the increased glucose uptake by the cell. So whenever there is insulin deficiency, there is decreased glucose entering into the cell. It will lead to intracellular glucose deficiency. Now this intracellular glucose deficiency will lead to deficient utilization of the glucose, and ultimately satiety center cannot be stimulated. Now where the satiety center is there? Satiety center is actually present in the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus. So both satiety center and the third center, feeding center, all the center are present in the hypothalamus. The satiety center is present in the ventromedial nucleus of the hypothalamus, and the hunger center is situated in the lateral hypothalamus. So once the satiety center is not stimulated, there is excessive eating will occur. That excessive eating is known as polyphagia. Next thing we need to learn is the glycosylation of the protein. See, once the plasma blood glucose level is increased for prolonged period of the time, it causes glycosylation of the protein. Now, what is glycosylation of the protein? Glycosylation of the protein is non-enzymatically reversible attachment of the glucose to the protein molecule. The protein that we are going to learn is the hemoglobin. It is known as glycosylation of the hemoglobin, HbA1c. Now, what happens in glycosylation of the hemoglobin? There is a condensation of the glucose in the valine chain of the beta chain, valine of the each beta chain of the HbA. So normally, the amount of glycosylation of the protein is 3 to 5%, but once in diabetes mellitus will set, there are more amount of the plasma glucose will be present for prolonged period of the time. It will lead to increased glycosylation of the protein to 10 to 20% of the total hemoglobin. Now, the find out of the glycosylation of the hemoglobin is very much important tool for monitoring the diabetic control. It reflects the glycemic history of a person of previous 2 to 3 months. Why 2 to 3 months? Because the hemoglobin is actually present inside the RBC, and the lifespan of the RBC is 120 days. So if glycosylation of the hemoglobin is there, it is present for mainly 2 to 3 months. Next thing that is occur in the diabetes mellitus is microangiopathy. The meaning of microangiopathy is that there is a problem in the small blood vessel, basically the capillaries. So what happens in diabetes mellitus? The capillary basement membrane becomes thicker due to structural changes caused by their glycosylation. Here again there is a glycosylation will take place, but in this there is a capillary basement membrane. So there are three types of the microangiopathies are there. First is the diabetic neuropathy. Next one is the diabetic retinopathy, and the last one is the diabetic nephropathy. All these three changes will be take place due to the glycosylation of that particular protein. Till now we discussed the hyperglycemia and its consequences. Let's learn about the hyperlipidemia and its consequences. So what happens in diabetes mellitus? There is an insulin deficiency. That insulin deficiency will lead to decreased glucose utilization and increased fat utilization. It uses fat for the energy. So ultimately, there is a lipolysis. There is a breakdown of the lipid that is stored in the adipose tissue and release of that lipid into the circulation. So there are hyperlipidemia will occur. There is increased free fatty acid inside the plasma, and this increased free fatty acid inside the plasma will lead to atherosclerosis. There is one thing. Now this increased free fatty acid will ultimately transported inside the liver. Inside the liver, this free fatty acid is converted into the acetyl-CoA, and this acetyl-CoA will be condensed to acetoacetic acid and other two other form of the ketone bodies. What are they? The first one is the acetoacetate. Next one is beta hydroxybutyric acid, and the last one is the acetone. So basically, lipolysis will ultimately lead to increased ketone body formation. and it leads to the ketosis. Increased amount of the ketone bodies inside the circulation is known as ketosis. Now, due to this ketosis, there is a acidosis will occur, decreased pH of the blood and causes ketoacidosis. And the condition, the severe condition is known as DKA, diabetic ketoacidosis. It is a severe condition will take place in the person suffering from diabetes mellitus. Now, one more thing is that what is acetone breath? You see the acetone breath in the patient is suffering from severe diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, how it smells, you can easily know by smelling the nail polish remover. It also use the acetone. So the same type of smell will be seen in patients suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis. So what is acetone breath? It is a rapid and deep respiration. It is also it's like a air hunger, and is also having a dyspnea, difficulty in breathing. So person having a air hunger, having a dyspnea, rapid and deep respiration, it is known as a Cosmos respiration or Cosmos breathing. This Cosmos breathing is a key feature of the person suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, what happens in diabetic ketoacidosis? There is great amount of increase in the ketoacidosis and the increased amount of acetoacetic acid. Now, this acetoacetic acid, if it increase in a great amount, it is converted into the acetone. Now, there is one more characteristic of the acetone is that acetone is a volatile. So, as it is volatile, it is vaporized into the expired air. So, in acetone breath, by this acetone breath, we can easily diagnose type 1 diabetes mellitus by simply smelling the breath of a patient. This is about the acetone breath. So, what is actually the acetone breath? Acetone breath is a rapid and deep respiration. Person having air hunger, person suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, diagnosis of the diabetes mellitus. The simple way to diagnose a diabetes mellitus is for measurement of the person's blood glucose level, that is RBS, random blood sugar level, and the fasting blood sugar level. In addition to that, if we test the urine of a patient, we also will be able to diagnose diabetes mellitus or let's say severity of the diabetes. So urinary glucose level and other one is the urinary ketone bodies. So there is one strip is available. You have to just dip that strip. These are the strip. You have to just dip that strip to the patient's urine, and there is a changes of the color will take place, and you can identify the amount of the glucose present in the urine. So it is very easy method, and it is basically testing the glucose that is present in the urine. So it depends on the renal threshold, but it is not that much of accurate. So as you see, the strip is present to measure the urinary glucose level. There is also one more strip is present to identify the presence of the ketone bodies in the urine. And the color coding will show the severity of the ketosis that is person have. Now the other method and the invasive method for diabetes mellitus is the measurement of the blood glucose level. It is known as the fasting blood glucose FBS. Now the normal level of the FBS is less than 100 milligram per deciliter or 100 ml. And as this level will increase, there is a classification known as pre-diabetes and diabetes that we learn in our subsequent slide. So one thing that we need to take is the patient's blood, so fasting blood sugar level. Another test is known as glucose tolerance test. Now, what actually we have to do in the glucose tolerance test? In this test, no food or drink after 8 p.m. prior to the test. So, if you are going to test the tomorrow, then no food or drink will be 8 p.m. today. So, except water. Now on the test day, first once the patient approach to the lab, first take a blood sample. That blood sample is the fasting sample. It is known as FBS. After taking the first sample, you have to check for the blood glucose level present in the sample. That is the fasting blood glucose. After that, give 75 gram of the glucose in 250 ml of the water on a test day. So once after patient come to the laboratory, first you have to take the sample and check the blood glucose level, that is fasting blood glucose level. After taking the sample, give 75 gram of the glucose in 250 ml of the water on the test day. Now how GTT is done? See, in previous slide I told you that first you have to take a fasting blood glucose level. After that you have to give a 75 gram of the glucose in 250 ml of the water. Now after giving the glucose, there are two ways to do glucose tolerance test. There are two methods. One is the conventional method. Another one is known as mini GTT. It is a WHO defined criteria, having a WHO defined criteria. So what happens in conventional method? In conventional method, total 6 sample will be taken. So 6 times you have to pierce the skin of the patient, take a 6 sample, blood sample, and every sample you have to take every 30 minutes. In mini GTT is less invasive so far. You have to take 2 sample. One is first sample is the FPS once the person approaches the laboratory in the early morning, and second sample is 2 hours after giving the glucose. That is PP to BS postprandial 2 hours of the blood sugar. Result of the GTT after getting the this graph showing the conventional GTT method. You see, you have to take a 6 sample. This this x-axis showing the time, and this y-axis showing the blood glucose level. And this dotted line that is present or drawn over here, it is a renal threshold. So in normal person, is this red showing this red line showing that the amount of blood glucose level will never reach to the renal threshold level. That is a normal GTT, the person having normal GTT. One more GTT showing is this blue colored line. See, after giving glucose, or after giving the first the dose of the glucose, you see the graph will cross the renal threshold. That blue colored line is known as IGT, means impaired glucose tolerance test. Person having impaired glucose tolerance but yet not reached to the stage of the diabetes mellitus. After some time, the blood glucose level of the impaired glucose tolerance patient reached to the normal level. And the third one, it is this green color portion, and this brown color portion is that person having blood glucose level higher than the normal one, and it will never reach to the normal level after 2 hours or 2.5 hours of the taking the sample. So these are the result of the GTT. GTT criteria is defined as the three different stages. One is the normal glucose tolerance, another one is the impaired glucose tolerance, and the last one is the diabetes mellitus. Glucose tolerance test will be signified. The normal person having the fasting blood glucose level less than 100 milligram per deciliter, and after 2 hours of giving the glucose, the PP2BS value will be less than 140 milligram per deciliter. Now person having impaired glucose tolerance, having a fasting blood glucose between 100 to 125 milligram per deciliter, and PP2BS is 140 to 199 milligram per deciliter. Now person is suffering from diabetes mellitus, having a fasting blood glucose level more than 126 milligram per deciliter, and the PP2BS is more than 200 milligram per deciliter. Now criteria for diagnosis of the diabetes mellitus based on the glucose tolerance test. WHO defined criteria for diagnosis of the diabetes mellitus will be like this. The fasting blood glucose level is more than 126 milligram per deciliter. PP2BS is more than 200 milligram per deciliter, and the HB1SC is more than 6.5 percentage. This is the laboratory criteria of diabetes mellitus, but the clinical criteria, the symptom of diabetes mellitus should be also be present. These are the polyuria, polyphagia, polydipsia, and weight loss. These are the criteria of the diabetes mellitus. let's discuss about the treatment of the type 1 diabetes mellitus. Now, what actually happens in type 1 diabetes? There is a deficiency of the insulin. Insulin is not formed properly by beta cell because of the destruction of the beta cell. So, the easy treatment of the type 1 diabetes mellitus is to just give insulin. Right? Now, in past, insulin was derived from the animal. We have to separate the insulin, but nowadays insulin will be made by recombinant DNA processes. Now, insulin is available in the several forms. The most commonly used one is the regular insulin, having a effect to 3 to 6, 8 to 3 to 8 hours. And other forms of the insulin are also available that are absorbed so slowly and from injectable site. An effect lasts longer than 10 to 48 hours. Treatment of type 2 diabetes mellitus. So what actually happens in type 2 diabetes mellitus? In type 2 diabetes mellitus, there is a insulin resistance. So instead of giving insulin, if we just remove the insulin resistance, then it will be very beneficial to type 2 diabetes mellitus. So in order to increase the insulin sensitivity or remove the insulin resistance, dieting and exercise will be preferred. Both these things will lead to the weight loss and it will reverse the insulin resistance. So if this strategy fails, then drug can be introduced. So which type of the drug can be given? The drug that increase the insulin sensitivity or the stimulate the increased amount of insulin secretion of the insulin from the pancreas. What are the drugs used for the type 2 diabetes mellitus? The one class of the drug that causes increased insulin sensitivity. The name of the class is thiazolidinediones. Another set of the drug will suppress the liver glucose production. That set of the drug is metformin. Third type of the drug will causes additional release of the insulin by the pancreas. These are the sulfonylureas. I told you in detail about how the sulfonylurea will increase the release of the insulin. The sulfonylurea will act on potassium channel that is present over the beta cell and close the potassium channel will ultimately lead to the depolarization. The depolarization will ultimately causes influx of the calcium. That influx of the calcium will lead to the degranulation of the insulin. The next type of the drug that mimics the incretin, the drug that act like incretin like GLP-1 and GIP. You know the action of the GLP-1 and GIP, it will increase the insulin secretion. So it enhances the insulin secretion. Now next set of the drug, it is known as the enzyme dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitor. Now what is the function of this enzyme? This enzyme will block or it causes the degradation of the incretins. So by somehow if you inhibit that enzyme, then GLP-1 and GIP, the incretins will be work more amount of time. So the set of the drug is known as DPP-4 blocker. Now what is the role of this drug? This drug will block this enzyme dipeptidyl peptidase 4 and this enzyme will work on degradation of this GLP-1 and GIP. So by blocking that enzyme, we make this hormone GLP-1 and GIP more amount of the time. So ultimately, it inactivates the GLP-1 and GIP, this enzyme. So by increasing the availability of the GLP-1 and GIP, we make sure that the incretin will be present in the circulation for prolonged period of the time and it causes increased insulin secretion. So this is all about the early clinical exposure of the diabetes mellitus. Thank you.